in, with my hoarse voice, back in California, virtually. Second time on the podcast with the most worshipful past Grandmaster, Russ Charvonia. He was the Grandmaster in California of Freemasons 2014-2015. He's also, though, and what we're here to talk about, we talked about last time, is the president of the Worldwide Civility Council and the Masonic Family Civility Project, which we're going to talk more about. Thank you so much for being back on the podcast.
My pleasure, Cameron. Let me clarify. I am the founding president, now past president, of the Worldwide Civility Council. I've since turned that over to two very able people. So,
yeah, sorry, forgive me. Yes, founding president is what I should have said.
No problem.
You know, civility is, and we talked about this in our last episode, which I plan to link. And it strikes me as, you know, during our last podcast, a lot of the discussion around civility related to what the world was going through at that time, as related especially to COVID, to people's concerns around mask mandates or vaccines, and kind of the uncivil conversations, if you want to say, that were going on between those. And I remember thinking to myself, even at that time, you know, COVID's not going to last forever, or these health restrictions aren't going to last forever. And the emphasis, at least subtextually, that I got was, how do we be civil over the next, say, 2 years, up until COVID kind of goes away, or at least the health restrictions ease. Now it's a few years later, the health restrictions have eased, but the concerns around civility do not seem to have eased with it. It seems as though the concerns are just as strong almost, or the issues around civility or lack of civility are just as strong as ever. Did that surprise you, or what was your thoughts? Did you think, what is your thoughts around kind of the ideas of civility post COVID? And have you been surprised that these issues have continued past the easing of health restrictions and things like that?
Unfortunately, I'm not at all surprised that the state of incivility has not only maintained, but actually worsened since that period of time. And the reason is, when I first started this effort 10 years ago, a decade ago, I had suggested to the conference Grand Masters that, you know, let's look at society right now, and it's becoming increasingly uncivil. And if allowed to continue, this may turn into a world we're not willing to leave to our children and grandchildren. And I've since reported back to that conference almost every year in the intervening decade. And as I reflect, I ask myself, how could it have continued to get worse? And yet it does seem to each and every year. And what the pandemic proved to me is that it was just one more excuse for people to treat people poorly. And when the pandemic lifts and the restrictions and so on are but a memory, there'll be something else. And that, to me, tells me how systemic this state of incivility is in society today, and how absolutely critical it is we double down, triple down, quadruple down on our efforts to try to stem the tide. I'm going to share one more quick thing, if I may, and I'm sorry. I mentioned this on the last time we were together, and I've had people over the years tell me, you know, Russ, periods of civility and incivility are purely cyclical. And if you just wait it out, it's going to get better. And what I said then and continue to say now is, I have two problems with that theory. One is, there's nothing wrong with us shortening this period of negativity if we possibly can. You know, let's get back to a state of civility sooner rather than later if we can. But my second greater fear, and that's what I think is bearing out, is that this way of treating each other in a disrespectful, inhumane way becomes so much a part of our moral fabric, so much a habit, so much of who we are, that we can't just turn the switch and flip it around. And that's what concerns me today, and why I think that the tenets of Masonry are more important for society now than perhaps ever.
Yeah, I like what you had said. The idea of looking for an excuse to treat people with a lack of civility, right? So it's it starts with COVID, for example, or whatever it is, right? It's not it's not the issue. It's people wanting an excuse to act in an uncivil manner, right? And for a while, people had COVID as that excuse. When that went away, people found another reason, another excuse. Which, I mean, I think that's true of it's not just civility, it's emotions as well, right? Like if you want to be angry, you'll always find a reason to be angry. If you want to be happy, you'll always, you can find reasons to kind of justify any behavior or any feeling. um
And I don't know that it's intentional. There's certainly some segments of society that think they benefit from creating this us versus them mentality and the bullying and so on. But I really think that for the most part, it's kind of happening to us instead of us deciding this is the way we want to be, which you've got to flip that on its head and say, okay, now we have to be more deliberate about creating the type of world we want it to be instead of just letting the winds of change take us where they're going to.
yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure, how do I put this? Well, so I think bringing this to a Masonic perspective, um, you talked about and you mentioned, right, there are people who benefit from division. And I think that probably that is one of the most dangerous things about the modern social media landscape, Freemasonry, not Freemason, the modern media landscape, is there is a financial incentive to creating division. Um, you're going to be just as well financially getting the right people to hate you as getting the right people to love you. The I think the reason why Freemasonry, and not just Freemasonry, but Freemasonry is so important is because it is one example where that business model, quote unquote business model, doesn't work, right? A lodge cannot function if everybody hates each other or is uncivil to each other, right? A YouTube channel, a person on social media can get a lot of traction from saying the thing that will piss off the right people. A worshipful master in a lodge can't do that and expect the lodge to survive. So I think kind of what you almost have is competing, for lack of a better term, business models, where the business model of a Masonic lodge is one that relies on civility and cordiality and etiquette and respect, whereas the business model of social media, especially, and the media, is one that relies on division and incivility and sarcasm and all those type of things, right? And I think that that is such an interesting dynamic, and the reason why Freemasonry is so important is because it forces you to be polite and it forces you to be civil, whereas in other, and it incentivizes those things, whereas in other areas and spheres that incentive isn't there.
I totally agree. We teach decorum, we teach consensus development. We emphasize holding each other accountable when we see one of our brothers erring in his ways. And there's no other part of society that I think is able to do that quite as well as we are. I mean, if you think of a business arrangement, if you're an employee of a business and you're messing up, they fire you. If you think about it in terms of a religious organization, they have different ways of telling you that you're not behaving properly. Masonry, we're taught what? If we see a brother who's materially erring in his ways, we're to whisper good counsel in his ear. We're all about trying to seek a reformation, try to, bring about a suitable solution to whatever is ailing us at the time. And because we have these common obligations, bonds to one another, we've said, you know what, Cameron, I'm going to work with you to try to improve the situation instead of just throw away and give up on our relationship. And that's unlike most of our relationships in the world.
Well, especially I think it's unlike most of our relationships in the world in 2024. Um, and one of the fascinating things is the idea of being able to kind of select your relationships in really hyper specialized ways, which again I think is something where Freemasonry provides a good counter to that, right? If and I can't think of the study I read, but the idea of, so if you start with the premise that humans are social creatures and we need to have some type of social relationships with each other. Um, Back in the day, quote unquote, especially before internet, before social media, you were forced into friendships or acquaintances with whoever was in your vicinity. So you had to be friends with your neighbor. You had to be
And front
friends with your
porches.
front porches, right? You had to kind of create those relationships. Even if you didn't necessarily like your neighbor, you had to at least find a way to get along with them enough that you could rely on each other for the neighborhood, for the benefit of the neighborhood, with your job, same type of idea. Now, if you can go online and you can find the most specialized version of yourself, the person who agrees with you 100% of the time, and try to get a relationship with them, instead of forcing yourself to be friends with somebody who you may not agree with on everything or on most things. And I think that's the benefit of Freemasonry, right? It's like, in the purposes of the lodge, it doesn't matter what your brother thinks about politics or about religion or about whatever disagreements you have. The important thing is the lodge functioning well and successfully. And that common purpose, I think, is something that, again, Freemasonry provides, right? And civility is a way to achieve common purpose. If you're not civil
Yeah.
to each other, you're not going to have a successful lodge meeting, that's for sure.
I'm going to paraphrase what I think I'm hearing you say, and that is there's so many ways that we can easily build a bomb-proof echo chamber into which we ensconce ourselves. And a well-run lodge, a well-comprised lodge of diverse membership and opinions and backgrounds and so on is the antithesis to that echo chamber. It's there to help broaden your thoughts. It's there to help, you know, well, one of the things that, lodges of old were incubators of ideas. You look at the founding of the United States, a lot of those ideals on which this country is formed are Masonic in nature. And that's not an accident, of course. It's because so many of the founding fathers were Masons. But that didn't just sprout up. I can just imagine these men having these heated debates inside a lodge, in a tavern with Masonic brothers, wherever it was. No, it needs to be this. No, it needs to be that way. And I think we're away from that. You said something earlier that, well, we avoid the talk of politics and religion and so on. And that's absolutely true within tiled lodges. But how often after a lodge meeting do we go out for a cold drink and then have those conversations? And because we're brothers, because we respect each other, because we just came out of this solemn, sacred space of the lodge, we have that basic level of respect where we can hear each other, even though our opinions are radically different from one another. We need to get back into that more. I think too many of the times, we go to a lodge meeting, we shake hands, we hug each other goodbye, and we get in our cars and, we head home and turn on the game or whatever. If we instead hung out afterwards and just shot the breeze a little bit, maybe we could start changing things a little more for the better.
Yeah, it's a fascinating, I think. Well, and that brings in its own kind of really fascinating ideas around what is the purpose of a lodge, what is the purpose of Freemasonry, right? When do you have these discussions? because there are some who would say one of the beautiful things about Freemasonry, right, is almost how it's one of the few places where, at least theoretically, um, kind of politics, religion, all those quarrelsome topics are almost irrelevant, right? And in theory, I don't need to know the political stance of my brothers or anything like that. I just need to know, for example, if it's a lodge meeting, are they capable of opening a lodge, closing a lodge? Do they know their Masonic ritual? That is kind of, I think, we can't be political 24/7. And I think one of the beautiful things about Freemasonry and about a lodge meeting is it gives us a chance to escape kind of those topics and again focus on building things together, which I think is a beautiful thing. Um, and it seems that so many areas of the world now have become subsumed with politics, and it's unfortunate because I often wonder actually how much of that is real, quote unquote, right? Do people actually, on a day-to-day living, what's more important, right? How your neighbor's doing or who the president is, right? It's probably how your neighbor's doing. And so or how your brother is doing. And I think Freemasonry does provide a really unique opportunity to leave those things outside the lodge and focus on building something together that doesn't rely on those things.
But again, we've got to be intentional about it. We can't just, open our lodge, conduct our meetings, close the lodge, and so on, and expect that these outside forces aren't going to impact it unless we're deliberate about it. We need to, make sure that we are emphasizing when we cross the threshold of that lodge room, we're leaving the profane behind us and we're entering the sacred and doing that sacred work. I am not always good at this, but I try real hard to leave my cell phone on the Tyler's desk when I come in, because otherwise I'm real tempted to go look at it during a meeting, and that takes me away from the business at hand, and it gets me out of that zone that I should have been in.
I have the same rule. I never bring my cell phone into a lodge room. Even if I'm visiting another lodge, I'll find a place to leave it outside of the lodge room.
Yeah, I'm not 100% about it, but I'm pretty good about it. I need to get even better. My problem with that is then they talk about upcoming events and I don't have my calendar with me.
You you mentioned leaving on the Tyler's desk. Does your lodge have like a special place to leave phones, or do you just leave it there yourself?
Yeah, we don't. I just leave it right there, and I leave it with my key so that I don't forget it with my car key.
That's very, very, yeah. So it's nice to hear somebody else tries to do the same thing as I do, because I also try. Do you think, because I know you have to take off soon, this is a shorter podcast, that word intentionality, do you think that's kind of the key to this? Being intentional, and to make it to the more broad point, is it about being intentional for civility? Like, as opposed to just this belief that if, civility will just happen, is it important that people, Masons or otherwise, when they wake up in the morning or throughout the day, try to be intentional about civility and being civil and actually try to put themselves in a quote unquote headspace where they are trying to be civil to each other and being intentional about it and not just hoping it will happen?
I'm going to give you a little longer answer than you may be searching for here, but incivility to me is like water. It's going to find its course no matter what. It takes no effort. Gravity's going to take care of incivility. Civility does take effort, but it's not as simple as waking up in the morning and saying, you know what? I'm going to treat people properly today. Instead, to me, it's about building those muscles. It's about developing those habits. I had an incident. I was driving yesterday, going back and forth to the hardware store because the project I was working on wasn't going right. And everybody on the road was driving like a jerk. Okay. Sunday drivers, whatever the case was. And I tried more than once to honk somebody. And I gave it a little beep like we used to do, and nothing came out. And it occurred to me, Our car horns used to be a whole lot more sensitive. It took nothing to beep, beep. Now you got to actually press on that thing. And I wonder if the car makers didn't, consciously or subconsciously help to make our driving a little more civil. So that to me was an allegory, to my life. If I can just, start to hit the horn, but it doesn't love me, and I now have to be a little more conscientious and conscious about how I'm going to react, that will help me to be more civil. And then, the intentionality is, yes, we have to build it in to how we treat one another. I have a policy. I know many people have the same policy. If I'm getting upset in an email exchange, I will not allow my reply email to go out for several hours. And more often than not, I am able to get myself to pick up the phone and say, hey, I don't think the conversation's going the right way. What can we do to get it going properly? Because more often than not, it's a silly misunderstanding. But that takes effort. It seems inefficient. I can just kick out that email a whole lot easier and pick up the phone and have a 10-minute phone call. But in the long run, it's a whole lot more efficient to invest that in our relationships. So intentionality, yes, I think waking up every morning and doing some meditation, if you will, and saying, yes, today I will treat my fellow citizen with more dignity, more respect, more civility. That would be really, really beneficial. But I think we also have to do things to build that civility muscle so that we react in a way that we are later proud of more frequently than we're later embarrassed by.
One way to build a civility muscle is to check out different resources, one of which would be the Civility Mosaic, which you wrote with Michael Ashley. I'll leave a link to the webpage in the description. We talked about it last time as well. But what is some of the things you've got working on the horizon? What's coming up for you? I know that you do a ton of volunteering in the community. You also do a ton of speaking on civility. Anything coming up in future? Any more books or any more plans in the coming weeks, months? I know you've always got something.
Yeah, I seem to, it seems. But I did write a children's book. It's called Aisha for President. It's a book on civility for children without ever mentioning the word civility, because it occurred to me that it is going to take that generation to start turning things around. It's kind of getting a little too late with our generation. Not to be entirely defeatist, but we really have to focus on the younger generation to turn things around, I believe. So Aisha for President is a great book for the children, grandchildren in your lives. If you are not a civility ambassador, consider becoming one. If you're involved with Masonry, you go to civilityambassadors.org. If you're a non-Mason, you're part of our general community and you want to get involved, go to civilityambassadors.com. I will tell you we're building out the community civility ambassador site, so it's not quite ready for prime time, but that's our biggest effort right now. And then the final thing I'll mention is our certified civil designation. Businesses, individuals can apply to be certified civil. And this is kind of like the good housekeeping seal of approval, or the underwriter laboratory seal, if you will, that we want to get this so wide reaching that it becomes kind of a subconscious stamp of approval that, if we have that little certified civil designation on our social media or on our website or our email, that it tells people that they can hold me to a higher standard and expect to be treated properly by me. And if I miss the mark, if I fail, they can file a civility concern with the Worldwide Civility Council. And so, Cameron, you can call them and say, Russ treated me in this way, and I just don't think that was appropriate. And rather than them coming to me and saying, you're no longer certified civil, they're going to work with me as to how I can change things, how I can improve, and therefore give you and me a chance to salvage our relationship. So we think this certified civil has an opportunity to, from the grassroots, the ground up, to really start to create greater accountability and thus to repair our world.
And I mean, just to be clear, obviously you base a lot of this on Masonic principles and Masonic history, but you don't need to be a Mason to either enjoy the book, to be certified silver, right? This is something that people in general, you don't need to be a Mason to benefit from or to take advantage of.
That's exactly right. And the Civility Mosaic, I wrote it for three audiences. The Mason who wants to know how he can put what he learns inside the lodge to use in his various walks of life. The person that I deem to be Masonic curious. They've always wondered about Masonry, didn't know much about it. And the third reader is the one that doesn't give a hoot about Masonry, but wants to know what they can do to repair our world, to instill some sense of civility back to society.
I did a podcast, oh my gosh, a couple months ago now, maybe more, where we talked about, it was about Freemasonry and Judaism. We talked about the idea in Judaism about repairing the world. Um, uh, and I think that civility is one of the ways, maybe the most important ways, that we have to repair what seems like a pretty fractured world. So thank you for all of your work. Thank you for being on the podcast. I know you have to run. I'll leave the links to what we talked about in the description to this video. And I hope that things are going well for you down in California and for the Masons of California. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity, Cameron. I sure appreciate all you do.